Criticism.
Thank God that it's 5:01 and the show is over.
Commendation.
I am not a Lutheran, but I regularly listen to Issues, etc., and thank you for putting this on the air.
Conundrum.
A Catholic friend has come to our LCMS church, and he said, "Why do you say very God, a very God?" And I couldn't think of a good answer.
The Issues, etc. comment line, 618-223-8382.
Pro-life incumbents have done very well since Dobbs. Not one pro-life incumbent has lost a statewide race.
Margaret Thatcher very famously said, socialism works great until you run out of other people's money. In the Islamic system, the system works great until you run out of the infidels' money.
I love this quotation from Luther. He says, "Spare me from a church in which there are no sinners." The essential character of being a Christian is to be a redeemed sinner.
If we are Christians and we suffer, is that so unbelievable that we should bear a splinter of Jesus' cross after he has gone through so much as a perfect one?
Hospice nurses driving around from patient to patient love listening to Issues, etc.
Well, the largest Protestant adoption and foster care agency, Bethany Christian Services, has reversed itself on a very important issue. It issued a update of its statement of faith and belief. It will no longer be setting children out for adoption or foster care with LGBTQ couples. Now, what I find remarkable is I have not yet found a headline in the legacy media, with the exception of Fox News, about this story. Why is that? Greetings and welcome to Issues, Etc., live on this Wednesday afternoon, the 24th of June. I'm Todd Wilkin. Thanks for tuning us in. Terry Mattingly will join us to talk about media coverage of the largest Protestant adoption agency changing its policy on LGBTQ couples. We'll discuss two issues with Michael New, the 2025 abortion estimates and new Gallup poll on sanctity of life issues. Austin Ruse, president of CFAM, joins us to talk about the Southern Poverty Law Center's hate list, and Pastor Will Whedon will be alongside in hour two for part two of our series on the sevenfold graces of the Spirit in Isaiah chapter 11. Terry Mattingly is Senior Fellow on Communications and Culture at St. Constantine College in Houston, Texas. He writes Rational Sheep, a Substack newsletter on faith, family, and mass media. He's author of the National On Religion column for the Andrews McNeil Universal Syndicate, and for 2 decades, he led the GetReligion.org website. Terry, welcome back.
Glad to be here.
Is it possible to report why Bethany Christian Services chose to reverse its course on this hot-button issue?
Well, you see, there's the problem. It's going to be very hard to do that without the leaders of Bethany Christian Service telling you why they changed course again. And that's an issue that they probably have good reasons not to discuss. At the same time, it was hard for them years ago, 5 years ago, to say why they changed to an LGBTQ plus friendly policy in the first place. And the reason is that this is a really complex story in the world in which these people live and work. And I think at this point it may take the mainstream media. Let's take the New York Times, which has serious religion writers on their staff, and religion writers who, with backgrounds at like Wheaton College, have an understanding of how complex the evangelical world can be in the upper Midwest, or in the Midwest in general. I will not be surprised if a story doesn't come out eventually, but there are at least 3 stories that have to be covered in order to get this story down. And every one of them, the first one is an incredibly complex church-state story, and as we've observed a gazillion times in our conversations, the press struggles with church-state issues because they're very nuanced, they're very complex, and in often cases you don't have a clear liberal versus conservative side in a First Amendment religious liberty story. or at least that was true for decades. Now things are a little bit more black and white in the eyes of the press. Being pro-First Amendment apparently is now conservative, where it used to be the essence of liberalism. But one of these stories is simply the question. I mean, listeners can think back to headlines a number of years ago with the government trying to get a group of Catholic nuns, related to health care, to require them to keep their tax exemption status, nonprofit status. They were going to have to change their policies on birth control and even transsexual surgery, etc. Well, the Little Sisters of the Poor didn't want to do that. But the issue there is, can the government choose to do business with nonprofit groups that are religiously liberal or secular, religiously liberal in that they tend to agree with state governments and the national government on a lot of moral and social issues? Can they work with liberal Christians but not with conservative Christians? You end up with what's called viewpoint discrimination, to where you're having to say the state says the following religious doctrines are acceptable, while the other point of view on these issues is not acceptable. And the government, as a rule, is not supposed to be deciding theological questions of that kind. So if you're going to discriminate against people on one side of one of these issues, or if you're going to discriminate against conservative religious nonprofits in general, you basically have to stop giving the same tax breaks to all nonprofits, irregardless of their views on these controversial issues. And needless to say, there are a lot of powerful nonprofits in American life that value their nonprofit status. So if a state government or if the national government tried to go to a position where it takes away the tax exemption for everybody, that would be rather tough. All the time you hear people saying, well, churches are getting involved in social issues. We should strip them of their nonprofit status because we're not supposed to support their point of view. Well, okay. Are you going to take away the nonprofit status of environmental groups, labor unions, and a host of other different kinds of nonprofits? And, well, nobody wants to do that, so you have to go back to viewpoint neutrality. That's just one of the three complicated stories that we're dealing with here. And it's not strange on several levels that they keep calling it an evangelical group. I would call it a conservative Christian group in a complex part of the country. But see, don't you hear, the minute I say something like that, that doesn't go in a headline very well, does it? I mean, but like I say, we got three different stories here, and we need to talk about all of them.
Okay, so before we get there, what do you make of the fact that the New York Times, the so-called paper of record, wrote about, back in 2021, had a March 1st headline, Major Evangelical Adoption Agency will now serve gay parents nationwide, but has yet to write about the reversal of that?
Well, I just said I think that we'll get a story eventually, but I hope they put the religion writers on the story, because that's what they should do if they want to get to the actual story of what's happened here. But I think when you don't get a quick response from the people, the quick response here is, we are going to defend the Christian beliefs on which our work is based, right? My very wise older sister refers to this as a "we love God" response. It's kind of hard to say we don't love God. So we love God, which means we're going to live according to the doctrinal standards. And, oh, by the way, we have clarified those standards to make sure that people understand more clearly what it is we believe and why we believe it. Now, you've heard me many times through the years say that we're living in an era when religious nonprofits and religious denominations are not going to be able to run away from issues linked to the sexual revolution. And there's a famous quote from a theologically progressive Baptist, an ethics professor by the name of David Gushee, who once was at Union University, then he was at Mercer University, and he's got links now to several mainline Protestant institutions. Gushee once wrote a very candid thing in a commentary for Religion News Service, the people who produced the news story that you and I are actually talking about right now, the only story out so far, and the one that's probably driving Fox News or whoever else has gotten onto the story. And at this point, Christianity Today is running the RNS story, while the conservative World magazine has done its own report. Anyway, David Gushee, here's a very famous quote. Rod Dreher has quoted it and many others. Gushee said, quote, "It turns out that you are either for full and unequivocal social and legal equality for LGBT people, or you're against it." Gushee warned the Orthodox, "Neutrality is not an option. Neither is polite half acceptance, nor is avoiding the subject. Hide as you might, the issue will come and find you." End of quote. And that is blunt and honest. And the point that we're seeing here with the Bethany story is one we've seen with a couple of other major religious groups, is you cannot hide your position on LGBTQ plus issues or the sexual revolution in general. You can't hide it for long from people on both sides of the issue. And the people who on both sides will come and get you, which is one reason why I think the New York Times will eventually do a story, because they'll have people on the liberal side of this issue are probably calling them, have the reporters' phones on speed dial, and they're probably talking to them. But at the same time, Bethany had trouble hiding its position from people on the conservative side of the issues. So flashback, one of the things I think you can do here is flashback to a story from an earlier era, a couple of years ago at least. Anyway, and that was when World Vision briefly, like 2 or 3 days, said that it was going to hire Christians in gay marriages, or if that came up. And they said they hadn't changed their policy. Now, think about that Gushee quote when you listen to this. In an interview with Christianity Today, the president of World Vision said they were not endorsing gay marriage. Instead, gay marriage would join a series of issues like divorce, remarriage, baptism, female pastors, etc., that many Christian churches disagree on. Now, that was a paraphrase I was reading, but that's the heart of what he said. We're not changing our views, but we're going to say that Christians are so much in disagreement over some of these moral issues related to marriage and sex, gender, etc., that we're just going to agree to disagree even within the ranks of our own staff members. Now, another group that wrestled with that exact same proposition and kind of tiptoed to the left and then kind of came back was the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, when dealing with the status of some Mennonite schools and others that wanted to change their teachings on gay rights. And it turned out that it's just really hard to compromise on something as central to Christian anthropology and theology as the meaning of marriage and the meaning of gender and the basic biblical rules about sexuality. This is why, one of those questions in the TMAT trio, I ask about is the resurrection, was it real? Then I ask, is salvation through Christ alone? And the third one is sex outside of marriage a sin? It's just really hard to run from an issue that basic. And yet it's kind of what Bethany wanted to do on the definition of marriage and gender and same-sex acts, period. they wanted to kind of say, okay, we're going to try to live with everybody on this. And David Gushee is right. You can't do that. You either have to give his words full and unequivocal social and legal equality for LGBT people, or you're against it. And then he said, there is no avoiding the subject. Hide as you might, the issue will come and find you. I'm assuming that in some sense of finances, strong people that support it, the clientele with which it does the vast majority of its work, I think we're going to find out that Bethany found they could not run and hide from their constituency groups. And that's one of the stories here. I mean, let me go ahead and just say the three stories. You've got government neutrality with religious and secular nonprofits. Is that possible? That's a story. That's the Sisters of the Poor nun story. Then second, you have evangelical parachurch groups learning that they cannot hide from anybody on LGBTQ plus issues. That's the story of World Vision, the CCCU, and now Bethany, and I'm sure I could find you some other examples of that. You cannot hide what you believe, and you cannot say, oh, can't we all just get along? That's not going to happen when many, many, many of your supporters are traditional evangelicals, conservative Christians, traditional Catholics, etc. The third story, much more specific, concerning Bethany, is we are seeing behind the scenes an ongoing civil war inside the Christian Reformed Church on issues of sexual morality. And it's gotten a few headlines related to Calvin University and some of the debates by the Christian Reformed Church itself in restating its beliefs on marriage and sexuality more and more clearly to make it harder for people to try to waffle on the issue. And if you trace the history of Bethany and you look at the region in which it works, everything leads you back to the Christian Reformed Church. So I would imagine, I'm not predicting this, but I could just come short of predicting it, whatever mainstream reporters are working on this, if they're worth any salt, right now they're trying to get people within the Christian Reformed Church to talk candidly about the Bethany situation and how it relates to the other tensions in the wider world of Midwestern Reformed Calvinism.
So do you think that the context that two of the stories that I read put in, near the end, the Trump context of some policy changes made by Trump's administration with regard to LGBTQ people, is that a legitimate tie-in for this coverage?
Well, that leads you back to the first story, which is government neutrality with religious nonprofits. I think that leads you back to the fact that it is in Trump's political interest, kind of like it was with George W. Bush, but he wasn't as clear on it, to say the government is going to deal with conservative religious groups and liberal religious groups equally. And we're not going to demand that they give up their core doctrines, whether those be liberal or conservative. So if Trump is to blame for this in the eyes of some of the people on the left, it's because of that earlier issue. It's the people in the Obama and the Biden administrations who kept going after the Little Sisters. How many times did they drag them back to the U.S. Supreme Court? Or how many times has Colorado tried to drive the wedding cake baker back into court when what we're trying to get is government neutrality on some issues on which our public is radically divided? So I hope that serious religion reporters are allowed to work on this story, and I hope that some people who speak fluent Christian Reformed Church are candid on this and that we get some solid points of view on why this happened. If the Trump administration did anything, it made it easier legally and clearer that conservative groups should be treated with neutrality. And that's, like I said, that's one of the three stories here. But this is not something that you're just going to be able to blame this on Trump. I think it's going to be something linked to the actual constituency groups that love and support Bethany Christian Services the most. Their core supporters. I think it's going to come back to that. And I think that's going to lead you back into the conflicts within the CRC.
Terry Mattingly is our guest. We're talking about media coverage of the largest Protestant adoption agency changing its policy on LGBTQ couples. He had mentioned court. We'll talk a little bit about that next.
The church's music from the 20th century. The 17th century. The 11th century. The 8th century. The 4th century. The best of the church's music from the past 2,000 years. LutheranPublicRadio.org.
Listen to what you want, when you want. You're listening to Issues, Etc.
This is Pastor Matthew Harrison, President of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. The LCMS operates the second largest parochial school system in the United States. What can you expect from a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod school? There's one race, the human race. And Jesus died for the sins of every man, woman, and child from every land and every nation. Life begins at conception. All life is precious from womb to tomb, and every student, parent, and teacher is created in the very image of God. There's right and wrong, and we know which is which from the Ten Commandments. There are only two sexes, male and female. He created them. Marriage is the lifelong union of one man and one woman. There's such a thing as objective, absolute truth, and it's found in the person and work of Jesus Christ and His Word. To find a Lutheran Church Missouri Synod school near you, visit lcms.org/schools.
Welcome back to Issues, Etc. I'm Todd Wilkin. We're talking about media coverage of the largest Protestant adoption agency changing its policy on LGBTQ couples. Terry Mattingly is our guest author of the National On Religion column for the Andrews McNeil Universal Syndicate. So, Terry, I know something that will put this on the headlines for some time, and that would be if a gay couple were to sue Bethany Christian Services, in essence, in not unlike, bake the cake or make the website or take the wedding pictures, give us the baby kind of a thing. And the fact that Bethany spent a couple of years doing that might work against them in the courts, maybe all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah, that's a very good point. But I guarantee you the High Court isn't going to want to settle that doctrinal issue because it knows that's not its job. But you're right in saying that's, as a practical matter, for editors and for reporters, a lawsuit filed against Bethany would be a valid reason to reopen the story. At that point, it's back to the classic case of, can these newsrooms do fair and accurate coverage of experts on both sides of these debates? And people on both sides of these debates. Is that possible? but I think the court really has made it clear. I mean, there's a reason that the Colorado Baker cases keep going to the court, bouncing back, going to the court, bouncing back, is the court's already stated what it believes, what it thinks the Constitution says on this, and Colorado just simply disagrees, or at least a large percentage of the legal community in Colorado disagrees. So I guess we can find out, will people who oppose Bethany's clarifying its doctrinal stance and then saying we now intend to live by it, like thousands of other nonprofit groups, will they find a case that's in a state where they've got a chance to win at a couple levels of different courts and make things really awkward for Bethany in the meantime? Now, the other thing that can happen here, and this shows up in the RNS story and in the Fox story as well, Bethany all but admits that its own staff is divided on this issue. And it said people in essential positions are going to have to agree with our stance on this issue now, and a lot of other staff members will need to be willing to sign this new doctrinal statement a year from now. So there's your other place you could have a story. You have a chance now to say that this loving evangelical man or woman who took a job a couple of years ago with Bethany because they changed their stance on this, and they're super active in a doctrinally progressive Reformed Christian church, which is not the same as the Christian Reformed Church. They found, they're a member of a gay-friendly congregation that has years of support for Bethany. Then you could have your story as you're going to tell the story of this person who's now going to be fired from his or her job at Bethany because he, she, or they will not support this, what will be called a new doctrinal statement. And from the viewpoint of Bethany's leaders, it is a clarified doctrinal statement, and they clarified it because David Gushee is right. You can't hide from anybody on this issue. At some point, you're going to be forced to clearly state what you believe and whether you intend to have the people who work for you follow the doctrine that is supposed to define the foundation of your organization. Did that answer your question?
Sure. If you would, remind us about your 4 forms of media bias and how they shape the coverage of this story.
Yeah, I think this is something that argues it out. Years ago, I was speaking to the editors of the old Scripps Howard News Service, and I did a lecture in which I described that, when people say that the press is biased against religious stories and against religious people, and of course, you and I know from our many conversations there, they have more trouble being biased against certain types of religious people. They like good religious people. They like bad religious people in terms of the stories they're covering. Anyway, those biases really quickly, and the ones that apply here, one is the bias of space, time, and resources. You can't print a story if you have little space to print it, time to write it, or the money to hire a professional to do so. Well, in this story, we are dealing with newsrooms who have a professional who can write this story, if they'll give them a chance to do it. The second is the bias of knowledge. You can't write a story if you don't know it exists. And on a lot of these complicated church-state issues, I don't think there are people in these newsrooms that understand enough about the history of church-state law and the era when religious liberty was a liberal position. Liberals were pro-religious freedom. I don't think there are many editors that understand that, and they're going to be quick to say this is a Trump thing, this is a conservative Christian thing alone, this isn't about neutrality on these issues, it's about the state doing what's right. They don't have enough knowledge to cover the story. The third is worldview. It's hard to write a good story if you don't care that it exists. Well, Todd, I think your question about the flipping on this issue, and then my response that when they begin to hear stories of these couples who feel offended or hurt deeply and employees that feel hurt deeply, I think they will care about this story when they get it sorted out and realize what are the hooks here. But the final one is the bias of prejudice. It's hard to produce balanced, fair coverage of people that you truly dislike, distrust, or whom you feel are irrelevant. So what we're going to find out here is which of these biases best fits this particular story. If we end up with coverage that doesn't truly listen to the viewpoints of people on both sides of this issue, treat the people on both sides of the resulting debate with respect, accuracy, and fairness. And I hope we get follow-up coverage now that handles that task. I believe there are reporters that can do it, and I hope they are given a chance to do it.
So finally here, you had talked about changes in the Christian Reformed Church. How does a reporter go about making the connection here to Bethany Christian Services?
Well, you go to their website, and you'll see the history of the organization, and it comes out of the CRC. You can run a search with an AI program like Grok, and Grok will proceed to hand you like 14 or 15 URLs straight to the founding of the organization, who the founders were, where the major support comes from, and what parts of the once strong legal ties between Bethany and the CRC, what part of those ties remain, what parts got weakened at what point and why, and then you do a search for people involved on both sides of the debate in the CRC about the status of sex outside of marriage and gender dysphoria and same-sex marriage and the various issues involved here. Find those names, start calling them up, and I guarantee you people on both sides of this issue will have something to say about the Bethany case, why they made the first change 5 years ago, and now why they've changed back.
So where should an enterprising reporter, knowing that this is, I think it's likely to end up in court, where should they go next?
Well, they should go to the Christian Reformed Church, and they should try to find why some of these other organizations, I mentioned World Vision, I mentioned the CCCU, there are seminaries, there are schools fighting about this right now. You could even call David Gushee up and say, do you think your quote about people not being able to hide on this issue is relevant to the Bethany case? There would be a strong voice on the left that I think could give you some powerful insights on what happened here. So you're going to have to follow the three levels of this story and get you some people that can talk about it.
Terry Mattingly is Senior Fellow on Communications and Culture at St. Constantine College in Houston, Texas. He writes Rational Sheep, a Substack newsletter on faith, family, and mass media. He's author of the National On Religion column for the Andrews McMeel Universal Syndicate, and for 2 decades he led the GetReligion.org website. Terry, thanks.
Glad to be here.
Dr. Michael New joins us from the Charlotte Lozier Institute next. We'll talk about 2 issues, the 2025 abortion estimates and a new Gallup poll on sanctity of life issues. What did Martin Luther mean when he wrote that Christians live in Christ through faith and in the neighbor through love? And what's the difference between self-improvement and self-transcendence? Find out in the Issues Etc. Book of the Month for June, Lift Your Eyes, How to Live Outside Yourself. Learn more and purchase Lift Your Eyes at issuesetc.org or by calling Concordia Publishing House 1-800-325-3040. Lift Your Eyes, How to Live Outside Yourself, the Issues Etc. Book of the Month for June.
Hearing is taken for granted until you don't have it. It happens at all ages. Unfortunately, some are born deaf. Others lose it gradually. The end is the same, a world of silence. The Ephatha Lutheran Mission Society serves the deaf and hard of hearing domestically and internationally. They're the only recognized service organization in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod devoted solely to the deaf of all ages. Learn more at elms-deaf.org.
Are you looking for a confirmation gift for the confirmand in your life? Ad Crucium has a huge selection of lovely gifts to suit any budget. See our jewellery or browse our prayer aids with stunning icons, plaques, crucifixes and certificates. Our personalised ornaments and boxes are other great ideas. And of course, our theologically sound greeting cards complement the gift perfectly. Visit adcrucium.com. That's ADCRUCEM.com.
Criticism.
Thank God that it's 5:01 and the show is over.
Commendation.
I am not a Lutheran, but I regularly listen to Issues, etc., and thank you for putting this on the air.
Conundrum.
A Catholic friend has come to our LCMS church, and he said, why do you say very God, a very God? And I couldn't think of a good answer.
The Issues, etc. comment line, 618-223-8382.
Essential exercise for the Christian mind. You're listening to Issues, etc.
Issues, etc. guest Dr. Ben Mays of Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Here's what Martin Luther says about the pastoral office. My pastor is practicing the virtue that increases God's kingdom, fills heaven with saints, plunders hell, robs the devil, wards off death, represses sin, preserves peace and unity, and plants all kinds of virtue in the people. In a word, he is making a new world. He builds not a poor temporary house, but an eternal and beautiful paradise in which God himself is glad to dwell. We are calling good men to step up. Come to Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Learn more about studying for the vocation of pastor at ctsfw.edu or call 1-800-481-2155. Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, Indiana.